Welcome back to the Happiness Hack. I'm Tim Coulson, and thank you for being here. Today, I want to start with a question, and I want you to genuinely answer it rather than move straight past it. When was the last time you rested? Not scrolled through your phone, not watched something to numb out, not collapsed into bed because your body ran out of options, but actually, intentionally, without guilt, rested. Now, if that question brought up discomfort, if your first thought was, I do not really have time for that, or I will rest when things settle down, or if there was even a quiet twinge of shame at the mere idea of resting, then this episode is going to hit close to home. Because in my work, I've come to see the inability to rest as one of the most consistent and least talked about symptoms of the deeper struggles that bring people to conversations like this one. Busyness is one of the most socially acceptable forms of avoidance that we have. And today I want to talk honestly about why that is and what it is actually costing us. So let's discuss why rest feels like failure. For some of us, there is always a list, a project, a task that could be done. This sort of person fills every available moment with activity. They feel edgy and unsettled when things go quiet. They describe their busyness as a personality trait. I just don't like sitting still. I'm a doer. I thrive on being productive. And on the surface, this looks like drive or even admirable energy. But underneath it, in almost every case, is something that they are working very hard not to feel. For other people, we try to rest, but genuinely cannot. These people lie down and their minds immediately start running. They sit with stillness and within minutes are flooded with guilt and the relentless sense that they should be doing something. They have become so disconnected from their own body's signals, so unfamiliar with the language of genuine tiredness, that rest no longer feels restorative. It feels like another thing that they are somehow failing at. And sometimes we can be both of these people at once. So if you recognize yourself in either of those, you are not broken. You are human. And you have learned something that a lot of us absorb without ever being explicitly taught. That staying still is dangerous. That your worth is only safe when you are producing. That rest is something you earn rather than something you simply need. Today, I want to offer you a completely different story about rest. Because rest is not laziness. It is not the absence of ambition. It is not a reward you receive after doing enough, and it is not something you should need to justify to yourself or anyone else. And I want to say that clearly because a lot of people need to hear it more. Rest is not something you have to earn or something you have to justify. Many of us grew up in environments where rest was treated as an indulgence, where the unspoken rule was that the hardest worker was the most valued, and stopping felt vaguely shameful. Some people absorbed this through a parent who never sat still. Others through a culture that equated busyness with a virtue. And still others through a relationship that required them to always be performing, always useful, always available, until the idea of taking up space without producing something began to feel genuinely wrong. So here is what is actually true. Rest is not the opposite of productivity. Rest is what makes sustainable productivity possible. More than that, Rest is when your brain does some of its most important work, consolidating learning, processing emotion, integrating experiences, generating the creativity and perspective that no amount of forcing will produce. Have you ever had a thought or a solution come to you while you were in the shower or while you were using the toilet? Rest is not wasted time. It is some of the most important time you have. Barbara Fredrickson, a widely respected positive psychologist, developed what is known as the Broaden-and-Build theory of positive emotions. Her research showed something genuinely surprising. Positive emotional states, including the calm, ease, and restoration that comes from real rest, does not just feel good. It actively expands what the brain is capable of. It broadens our capacity for thought, creativity, empathy, and problem solving. This is when we build durable personal resources, resilience, relational warmth, and the ability to bounce back from difficulty. In other words, rest is not the absence of doing, it is the foundation of doing anything well. And the people who are most consistently high functioning, not the burnout and then recover cycle, but the people that are genuinely, sustainably capable, are the people who have learned to rest without guilt. Rick Hanson, a neuroscientist whose work brings together brain science and positive psychology, helps us understand why rest can feel so difficult. He describes the negativity bias, an evolutionary feature of the human brain that keeps us scanning for threat, holding tightly to difficult experiences, and treating stillness as vulnerability. Now, for our ancestors out on the savannah, this made sense. Relaxing your guard in a dangerous environment was genuinely risky. But most of us are not avoiding predators. We're now just avoiding feelings. Grief that has not been processed. Fear that has not been named. Questions about the future that feel unanswerable. The quiet that arrives when the noise stops and we are left alone with ourselves. And the brain, not equipped to distinguish between a physical threat and this uncomfortable feeling, responds to both in the same way. It keeps us moving. It keeps us busy. It keeps us producing because producing feels safe and stillness feels like exposure. Hanson's research on neuroplasticity, on the brain's genuine capacity to change in response to deliberate practice, offers something important here. Learning to rest without guilt does not require a personality overhaul. It's a skill, a capacity that can be built with intention and repetition. Every time you rest without the world falling apart, your nervous system receives a quiet but significant message. Stillness is safe. I do not have to keep running. And over time, that message begins to take hold. I want to take a moment to name the cost of staying chronically busy, because I think most people significantly underestimate it. Chronic busyness, the kind of driven by avoidance rather than by genuine engagement, has a predictable set of consequences. Physically, we have elevated stress hormones, disrupted sleep, compromised immune function, and a kind of bone-deep tiredness that no amount of coffee ever addresses. Emotionally, the numbing that comes from never being still enough to actually feel anything. Relationally, the people closest to us tend to get a depleted version of us. A version that is short-tempered over small things because there is simply nothing left in the tank. The version that is physically in the room but entirely elsewhere mentally. The parent that goes through the bedtime routine while mentally composing tomorrow's to-do list. Everyone around you can feel the absence, even when they cannot name it. And perhaps most quietly significant, chronically busy people tend to lose touch with themselves. They stop knowing what they actually feel, what they actually need, what they actually want, because they never create the space to find out. The busyness becomes a wall between them and their own inner life, and something stops them. An illness, a crisis, a chapter closing, and the silence that they discover with shock is that they do not really know who they are. I've sat with people in exactly that situation. People who have spent years running, providing, managing, achieving, and then one day, for some reason or another, it all stopped. And in the quiet, they found something that they were not expecting, that they were not at peace, but a stranger to themselves. And they had a lot of catching up to do. This situation is entirely reversible, but it requires the willingness to stop before you are forced to. I want to speak to something that comes up consistently when people try to rest, and that's guilt. Because for a lot of people, especially those who have been carrying a lot on their own, stopping feels like a kind of abandonment of the children who need things, of the responsibilities that do not pause just because you do, of the version of yourself that has always been the one who handles it. So resting can feel like a betrayal of everyone depending on you. But here's the reframe that I want to offer. Resting does not take you away from the people who depend on you. It returns you to them. It returns the version of you that exists after genuine rest, even brief rest. And that person is more present, more patient, more creative, and more emotionally available. So it is not the time spent resting that costs the people around you, but it's the cost of the depleted version that they get when you don't rest. So the next time this guilt arrives, as it will, try to notice it for what it is, a belief, not a fact. It's a belief, usually formed long ago, that your worth is conditional on your usefulness. And like all inherited beliefs, it can and should be questioned. It just takes practice. The shift here is not about scheduling a holiday or setting sleep targets. It is not about changing the story you tell yourself when you slow down. Start by noticing the thought that arrives the moment you stop. For most people, it is one of a small number of variations. I should be doing something. I have not earned this. If I stop, things fall apart. I will rest when this is done. So whichever version of that looks like you, all I want you to do is notice it. Don't argue with it, and do not immediately replace it with a positive affirmation. Simply name it. And then ask honestly, is this actually true? What is the evidence that stopping, just for this moment, is dangerous? What has actually happened in my life when I did stop? I want you to practice one form of intentional rest this week. And I want to be specific about what intentional rest means, because there is a real difference between numbing out in front of a screen and genuinely choosing to restore yourself. So take a walk without your phone. Spend 10 minutes sitting quietly with no agenda. Maybe you've got enough time to spend an hour doing something you enjoy for no reason other than that you enjoy it. Whatever genuine rest looks like for you, Give yourself one instance of it this week. Your nervous system will probably resist at first, but give yourself permission anyway. And that is exactly what your happiness hack for this week is. Something that I call the permission slip. I want you to write yourself one sentence on your phone, in a notebook, on a sticky note, heck, even on the bathroom mirror, just as long as it's somewhere you will actually see it. And that sentence is this: I have permission to rest today, not because I have earned it, but because I am a human and humans need rest. Then I want you to read it when the guilt arrives. Read it when the mind starts building a list. Read it before you open your laptop in the morning. You don't have to believe it yet. You really don't. You just have to keep reading it until some part of you begins to. Because the research on how beliefs change is so consistent. We do not think our way into new beliefs. We practice our way into them. If we act as if the new belief is true repeatedly, evidence accumulates and eventually the old story loses its grip. So people who learn to rest without guilt do not become less productive. They become more present, more creative, more emotionally available. And that, when you strip everything else away, is the whole point. So thank you for giving yourself the time to be here today. I want you to know that I do not take that lightly. Sitting with something rather than moving past it is itself a form of the practice we are talking about. So if the idea of resting without guilt feels far away right now, that is completely okay. You do not have to get there today. You just have to be willing to take one small step towards the possibility that you deserve it. Because you do. Not because you've done enough, not because your list is clear, simply because you exist. And that is enough. I'm Tim Coulson. This is the Happiness Hack. And as always, remember, the day is what you make it.